Tonight, you wander the quiet streets of Georgian London, where lamplight flickers against the fog, and a small amber bottle of laudanum waits patiently to unravel both pain and time. The streets are still damp from an afternoon drizzle, and the cobbles shine like uneven mirrors under the faint glow of oil lamps. You walk slowly, your shoes clicking in the hush of a city winding down. The Thames moves like a sluggish giant nearby, thick and dark, carrying both secrets and sewage in equal measure. A horse snorts somewhere down the lane, a reminder that you are never far from something that needs feeding or shoveling. London is alive, yes, but it is also yawning, stretching its arms into the quiet of evening. And this is where your story begins. In a world where pain is a daily companion, and a tiny bottle promises, at least for a while, to make it all float away. Laudanum, a tincture of opium, carefully dissolved in alcohol, corked into amber glass bottles, and sold legally on every respectable corner. Pharmacies display it proudly. Mothers administer it to fussy infants. Doctors prescribe it for coughs, headaches, menstrual cramps, and anything else that annoys the body. It is Victorian Tylenol with a little extra drama. You hold the bottle in your hand, its liquid clinging to the glass like a syrup that already knows you need it. Tonight's journey will not be fast-paced or heroic. It will be ordinary, slow, and faintly absurd, like much of life itself. And here's your cheeky warning. You probably won't make it through this day. Not because of danger or intrigue, but because you'll likely fall asleep before the lamplighter finishes his route. Before we wander deeper, a soft request. If you find yourself enjoying this kind of drowsy storytelling, gently tap the like button and perhaps subscribe. It helps this little channel keep going, one sleepy history lesson at a time. And if you feel like sharing, write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I promise someone else is probably lying awake in the same half-dreamy state as you are. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You slip into the life of an ordinary Londoner around 1820, though nothing feels ordinary when you live with constant aches, fevers, and anxieties. Medicine is still more guesswork than science, and doctors carry leeches in their pockets like spare change. But on pharmacy shelves, among jars of herbs and powders, sits laudanum, cheap, legal, and advertised as a cure-all. Major historical fact. By the late Georgian period, laudanum was one of the most widely used medicines in Britain, prescribed across classes, from aristocrats to factory workers. Obscure tidbit. Apothecaries often flavored laudanum with spices like cinnamon or cloves, giving it the faint illusion of being a fancy cordial rather than a dangerous narcotic. Imagine thinking of it as both medicine and after-dinner liqueur. It's like drinking NyQuil as if it were mulled wine. You walk past a narrow alley where a woman rocks her baby, humming softly. She dips a cloth in a diluted mixture of laudanum, letting the infant suckle it. The soothing syrup, they call it. For her, it's the only way to quiet the child long enough to get through her sewing by candlelight. For the child, it's an introduction to oblivion before teething is even over. Historians still debate whether these mothers understood the risks, or whether survival itself left no room for caution. Your steps echo along Fleet Street, where pamphlets flutter in the breeze. A preacher rails against vice from one corner, while a printer down the street sells broadsheets describing miraculous recoveries thanks to this very tincture. The city, in all its contradiction, loves both sermons and syrups, damnation and cure. As you tuck your collar against the fog, you can almost smell the mixture. Alcohol sharp at first, then that earthy, narcotic heaviness underneath. It is oddly comforting, the way certain unpleasant things are, like old libraries that smell faintly of mildew. A man stumbles past you, half-bowed under the weight of exhaustion. He tips his hat, polite enough, though his eyes don't quite focus. Perhaps he's just had too much gin. Or perhaps, like thousands in this city, He's living on measured spoonfuls of amber liquid, drifting through days in a haze that blurs hunger, grief, and the dull bite of factory life. You keep walking, and somewhere behind you, the lamplighter finally strikes flint to wick, coaxing another orange glow into the endless London night. Morning comes reluctantly. The fog doesn't so much lift as it shuffles sideways, revealing the city in shades of gray. You wake not in your bed, but inside this Georgian day itself, wrapped in wool that smells faintly of smoke. The streets are already alive, carts clattering, milkmaids calling, and the sweet-rot tang of market stalls mingling with coal smoke. You walk into a pharmacy, curious. The shop is orderly in its own chaotic way. Jars lined up like obedient soldiers, each labeled in careful script. Camphor, valerian, mercury, and laudanum, of course. The apothecary greets you with a nod, as if he's been waiting for you. He doesn't ask what ails you. He doesn't need to. Everyone aches from something in this century. On the counter, the bottles gleam, corks wrapped in wax. They look almost elegant, like they belong in a parlor display cabinet. And they're cheap, so cheap that even a poor laborer can buy relief. Laudanum costs pennies, making it more accessible than tea or sugar. You think about that. Relief is cheaper than sweetness, which might explain why half the city survives on bread, gin, and laudanum. Major historical fact. By the early 19th century, Britain's laudanum consumption was staggering, with estimates suggesting millions of doses taken annually across all classes. It was not just medicine. It was daily life's lubricant. Obscure tidbit. Some laudanum sellers marketed special blends for specific ailments, paregoric elixir for coughs, Godfrey's cordial for infants, and even Batley's sedative solution, which sounded professional enough to convince skeptical gentlemen. The branding was so persuasive that many believed each was unique, though all were essentially the same opium-laced concoction. You take a bottle just to feel its weight. The apothecary doesn't blink. He doesn't judge. In Georgian London, there's no shame in buying this medicine. You could be a noblewoman with nervous fits, a dock worker with a broken back, or a writer staring too long at a blank page. Everyone, at some point, needs their spoonful of quiet. Historians still debate whether contemporaries fully recognized laudanum's addictive potential, or whether they simply accepted dependence as an ordinary condition of urban life, like soot-stained windows or chronic coughs from coal smoke. You step back into the street, the bottle wrapped in brown paper, and the city hums around you. A gentleman argues with his coachman. A butcher sharpens his knife on the curb. A child chases a stray dog with giddy laughter. Life goes on, ordinary and fragile, threaded through with tiny rituals of endurance. And you, carrying your little parcel of oblivion, become part of the rhythm. You are not special in this. You are simply another Londoner navigating the thin line between pain and escape, duty and numbness. The church bells toll the hour. Somewhere, a mother dips a spoon into amber syrup. Somewhere else, a poet takes a long pull before attempting another stanza. And here you are, holding the same cure, the same crutch, the same companion that carried a generation through the smog and soot of Georgian streets. The day stretches on, and the fog, because this is London, never really leaves. The afternoon drifts in, not with sunlight, but with a thicker fog that turns the edges of buildings into soft smudges. You walk as if underwater, every sound muffled, every cartwheel and hoofbeat dulled by the damp. Even your own steps sound far away, as though someone else is walking behind you wearing your shoes. You pause near a small coffee house. Its windows are steamed, its doorway marked by the clatter of porcelain and the murmur of half-awake conversation. Georgian coffeehouses are not the bustling, laptop-filled havens you might know. They are smoky, loud, and faintly bitter, like your uncle's opinion at Christmas dinner. Yet, inside, every kind of Londoner gathers. Merchants with ink-stained fingers, clerks practicing their neat scripts, philosophers scribbling ideas that might one day be called genius if they aren't entirely forgotten first. And somewhere among them, at the back, sits a man you notice immediately. His clothes are fine but rumpled, his hair wild in that way that might be fashionable or might just be exhaustion. On the table beside him, along with a neglected cup of coffee, rests a small amber bottle. He dips into it casually, as though it were sugar. Spoon to lips, sigh, and back again. Major historical fact. Some of Britain's most famous literary figures, Coleridge, De Quincey, later even Dickens, used laudanum regularly. For them, it was inspiration, relief, and often both. The line between creativity and dependency blurred until even their readers could taste the tincture in the rhythm of their words. Obscure tidbit. Coffeehouses themselves sometimes sold laudanum-laced cordials, discreetly, as pick-me-this. Imagine ordering your morning latte and being offered a side shot of opium. It makes modern cafe syrups seem almost wholesome. The man glances up, his eyes both bright and heavy. He seems to notice you noticing him, and for a moment, the room feels caught between clarity and haze. He lifts his cup, a silent toast, though you know the real drink that fuels him is darker, more potent, and far less likely to keep him awake. Historians still debate whether laudanum truly enhanced creative vision or merely softened the edges of suffering long enough to allow work to continue. Was genius sharpened by it or dulled? Was brilliance born in the amber glow or buried there? No one can quite agree. You leave the coffeehouse behind, stepping back into the damp street. Outside, the world feels slower, heavier. Children run, their laughter sharp against the fog. A street vendor hawks roasted chestnuts, the smell sweet and smoky. The horse nearby shakes its mane, impatient. And you, still with your bottle tucked beneath your coat, walk on, part of this living mural where pain, relief, hunger, laughter, and fog all blur into one. The city doesn't care who you are. It never has. It only cares that you keep moving, one foot after the other, even if the ground beneath you feels soft as clouds. You turn down an alley and notice the same woman from before, the one with the child. The baby sleeps now, slack-jawed and silent. The mother's hands move swiftly with her needle, her eyes ringed with shadows but steady. You recognize the rhythm, survival at the price of quiet dozes. And you wonder, not for the first time, what it means to live half awake in a city that itself seems never fully awake. The evening approaches again, as though the day itself was little more than an interlude between fogs. You find yourself by the Thames, watching the black water shuffle past. Lanterns bob on boats. Their glow looks weak against the thickness of the river, as if the darkness has teeth and is winning the argument. A man leans near you on the railing, coat frayed, hat pulled low. He pulls a bottle from his pocket, uncorks it, and takes a long drink. Not laudanum this time, but gin, the other liquid London lives on. He notices your parcel, still wrapped, and chuckles without mirth. "That'll get you through," he mutters. "One way or another." Then he drifts off into the fog, as if carried by the river itself. Major historical fact. London in the early 19th century was a city of drugs and drink, and laudanum was never alone in its reign. Gin, porter, tobacco, and snuff were everywhere. What made laudanum unique was its respectability. Mothers gave it to infants, gentlemen carried it in waistcoat pockets, and doctors prescribed it without hesitation. Obscure tidbit. Some apothecaries claimed laudanum could cure not just physical pain but also homesickness. Imagine prescribing opium for the ache of missing your family. That's the 19th century equivalent of giving someone an all-expenses-paid trip to forget their problems. The river air bites your skin, and you head back toward the winding streets. Passing a bookstall, you see pamphlets stacked high, warnings about vice, sermons about temperance, poems about fog, and even advertisements for miracle cures. Among them, one promises Dr. Jenkins's soothing elixir, gentle, harmless, immediate. You know what it really is. Everyone does. But no one minds the lie because it's a lie that works. Historians still debate whether Londoners thought of laudanum as medicine or indulgence. Was it a prescription, or was it recreation? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the blur. Like so much else in this fog-drenched city, you wander toward your lodging. The streets feel quieter now, though not empty. The lamplighter returns, his ladder clattering against poles, his movements precise and unhurried. One by one, the lamps bloom with soft fire, as though the city itself is slowly opening its eyes again. Inside your small room, you set the bottle on the table. Its glass glimmers in the candlelight, promising, inviting, waiting. Outside, the city coughs and mutters, restless as always. Inside, you sit still, listening. And in this moment, as you look at the amber liquid glowing faintly in the bottle, you realize London is addicted not only to its medicines but to its very rhythm. Relief, fog, fatigue, relief again, like a wheel that never stops turning. Somewhere outside, the bells toll. Somewhere else, a baby cries. And here you remain, caught between sleep and wakefulness. One hand resting beside the cure you haven't yet chosen to take. The candle gutters in your room, dripping wax like a slow, patient hourglass. Outside, London sighs and creaks, its timbers bending, its chimneys groaning, its streets whispering with the shuffle of late-night feet. You lean against the window frame and watch the fog press against the glass as if it too longs to come inside. Somewhere below, a man sings, off-key, dragging a melody behind him like a sack of wet potatoes. His voice is the kind of tune you can't quite place, half hymn, half tavern song, and entirely too long. You close your eyes and let it drift in, an accidental lullaby. You think about the bottle on your table, how ordinary it looks, how extraordinary it feels. In Georgian London, laudanum is not contraband. It is a guest in every household. Mothers keep it beside the bread and butter, fathers in their jacket pockets, and apothecaries in their front windows, displayed as proudly as perfume. Major historical fact: in 1823, one physician claimed that as many as 1 in every 10 Londoners used laudanum regularly. That's not counting the casual sips, the infant-soothing doses, or the nighttime spoons meant to quiet a restless brain. It was the silent heartbeat of the city, amber and inevitable. Obscure tidbit: some grocers actually flavored laudanum with nutmeg or cinnamon for their higher-class customers. Imagine buying artisanal opium in the same spirit as we now buy seasonal pumpkin-spiced lattes. Civilization changes, but our little indulgences remain suspiciously similar. You lie back on the narrow bed, listening to the wood groan beneath you. The city never truly sleeps. You hear carts rattling long after midnight, children still awake in the alleys, women laughing too sharply outside taverns. London at night is like an old dog that refuses to lie down. It shuffles, scratches, and occasionally growls. Historians still debate whether this constant fog of laudanum dulled Londoners into passivity or freed them from unbearable suffering. Did it make the city manageable, or did it make the people easier to manage? Both answers fit, though neither feels entirely satisfying. The bottle catches your eye again. You don't move toward it. You don't move away from it. It simply sits, a reminder that relief and ruin share the same amber glow. And then, just as your breath starts to deepen, a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent. Just a polite little tap, as if the night itself wanted to come in. You open the door to find the innkeeper standing there, holding a lantern. His face is worn like old leather, his eyes watery but sharp. "Bit late, I know," he says softly. "But you left this downstairs." He hands you a folded scrap of paper, yellowed and smudged. When he's gone, you open it. The ink inside is shaky, but the words clear. Sleep is no cure. Drink, and you may dream without end. There is no signature. You frown, half amused, half unsettled. It feels like advice, or a warning, or maybe just the ramblings of a bored guest. Down in the street, a carriage clatters by, carrying someone far more awake than you. You imagine them. A merchant rushing home, a lover sneaking away, a doctor with a bag of potions, perhaps even a writer, notebook balanced on a knee, words tumbling faster than the wheels can turn. Major historical fact: Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater would be published in 1821, turning private habit into public fascination. His book described the vivid dreams and haunting visions laudanum could bring, but it also glossed over the shaking mornings, the sickly withdrawals, the gnawing dependency. Readers adored it anyway, as if it promised them entry into another world. Obscure tidbit: some Georgian households kept 2 bottles of laudanum, one for medicine, clearly labeled, and another discreetly hidden, reserved for private indulgence. The funny part? They were usually the same thing. Labels, it seems, are more for conscience than clarity. You fold the paper and tuck it into your pocket. Sleep begins to press heavier on your eyelids, but the night still has things to say. You step out again into the cool fog, the inn's door creaking behind you. The lamps are dimmer now, as if the city itself is sighing into its second sleep. A cat darts across the cobblestones, tail high, chasing shadows that belong to nothing. The church bell chimes once, twice, 3 times. Somewhere nearby, laughter spills from a tavern, followed by coughing, then silence. Historians still debate whether laudanum was truly seen as a blessing or a curse by its daily users. Diaries describe gratitude and horror, sometimes in the same breath. Relief could be both gift and trap. And perhaps that's the most human thing of all, to hold comfort in one hand and destruction in the other, pretending they're not the same. You walk slowly back toward your room, the fog wrapping around you like a damp quilt. By the time you lie down again, the city feels far away, as though it has drifted downstream with the Thames. Only the faint glow of your bottle remains, patient and waiting. Now the paper in your pocket whispers its line again. Sleep is no cure. Drink, and you may dream without end. And you wonder, not for the first time tonight, whether dreaming forever would really be such a terrible thing. The night stretches on, thick and endless, as if London has decided to pull a heavy wool blanket over itself. You drift between wakefulness and drowsiness, though the streets outside still shuffle with life. It's never really quiet here. Somewhere, a fiddle scrapes through a broken melody, followed by a chorus of half-hearted claps. A baby wails, then stops, likely soothed not by milk, but by a spoonful of something stronger. Yes, in Georgian London, even infants were not safe from the sleepy embrace of laudanum. Parents dose their babies with Godfrey's cordial or mother's friend, syrupy concoctions laced with opium. The goal? To stop the crying. The consequence? Well, historians still debate just how much damage was done, though it seems clear the line between remedy and harm was blurred beyond recognition. Major historical fact: Godfrey's cordial was one of the most common infant medicines of the early 19th century, advertised to keep babies quiet through the night. It sold for pennies, cheaper than bread, and often worked better at knocking a child unconscious than feeding them. Obscure tidbit: apothecaries sometimes sweetened these concoctions with molasses to disguise the bitter taste. Imagine being a baby, fed what amounts to liquid sleep syrup, and deciding, without words of course, that molasses means safety. Humanity has always been good at bribing itself with sugar. You walk again through the fog, this time toward the marketplace. The stalls are mostly closed, shutters drawn, but a few linger open, lanterns swaying above their counters. You see a woman hunched over bundles of herbs, tying them with twine. She looks up briefly, gives you a nod, and continues. Not every household could afford laudanum, after all. Some still swore by chamomile, valerian, or pennyroyal. Nature, when asked politely, offered its own sleep. You pause by a stall of glass bottles, their contents glowing faintly in the lantern light. The apothecary sitting behind it barely glances up. He knows what people want, and it is always the same thing. He lifts a bottle without a word, as though anticipating your thoughts. You decline with a shake of your head. He shrugs, replaces it, and goes back to staring into the dark. Historians still debate whether people truly understood the addictive grip of laudanum, or whether they simply accepted dependency as a fact of life. It wasn't shameful, at least not yet. More like drinking tea or smoking a pipe, or chewing bread when you weren't hungry. A daily anchor. As you leave the market, a drunk stumbles into your path. He grins with a toothless mouth, mutters something about sweet amber dreams, then wanders away, following his own invisible trail. You watch him vanish into the fog, and you wonder how many of these London souls are wandering, not entirely awake, not entirely asleep, just drifting in between. The city feels almost gentle now, its chaos muffled, its sins softened, its sharp edges wrapped in wool. And in your pocket, the folded scrap of paper seems heavier, as if its words are collecting weight. Drink, and you may dream without end. Dawn is trying to arrive, though you'd hardly know it. The fog clings stubbornly, and the weak light struggles through like a candle in wet glass. You sit by the inn's hearth, its embers faint but steady, while a few others gather in silence. No one speaks. Morning is too fragile to break with words. The innkeeper pours something into your cup. It's not tea, not coffee, both too expensive for his humble kitchen. It's barley water, thin and warm, tasting faintly of smoke. It won't wake you, but it will keep you upright. Across from you, a woman stares into her own cup. She looks ordinary enough, shawl wrapped tight, hair pinned loosely, eyes red from lack of sleep. But beside her, on the bench, rests a small bottle. She doesn't touch it, not yet. She just keeps it near, the way others might keep a rosary or a charm. Her gaze flicks to it now and again, as if reassured by its presence. Major historical fact: women in Georgian England were some of the most frequent laudanum users, especially among the middle and upper classes. Physicians often prescribed it for female troubles, which covered everything from headaches to hysteria to the vague condition of being alive and tired of it. Obscure tidbit: some women carried tiny laudanum vials decorated with silver caps or glass etchings, like fashionable accessories. They were not hidden but displayed jewelry that doubled as escape. It was both medicine and status symbol. A little bottle that said, "I can afford peace." The woman across from you finally lifts her bottle, unscrews the cap, and takes the smallest sip. Her shoulders ease, her jaw softens, her eyes glaze but no longer ache. She closes her eyes, just for a moment, as though reclaiming a sliver of sleep she lost to the night. Historians still debate whether laudanum's popularity among women reflected genuine medical necessity or society's quiet expectation that women remain calm, pliant, and uncomplaining. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the bottle was both cure and cage, its amber liquid asking women to carry their burdens silently. The hearth pops, startling the silence. Someone shifts, another coughs, and the woman tucks her bottle back into her shawl as if it never existed. The innkeeper refills cups, his movements as steady as the fog outside. And you sit there, watching, half awake, half asleep, realizing that this city runs on its bottles. The church bells may toll, the carts may roll, the markets may bustle. But beneath it all, Amber drips into cups, spoons, and lips, guiding London gently, dangerously into the next day. The paper in your pocket burns faintly against your leg. You almost take it out, almost read it again. But you don't. Instead, you sip the barley water, thin and warm, and let your eyes drift closed. The day has begun, but you're not entirely sure you're ready to meet it. You walk back into the pale morning air, and London greets you with the kind of sluggish bustle that feels more like a hangover than a beginning. The carts are already rumbling along the cobbles, though their drivers look as if they'd rather be in bed. Horses snort clouds of steam into the mist, children dart through alleys clutching baskets, and hawkers call out with voices that sound too tired to be persuasive. Somewhere, someone is already selling gingerbread, its smell faint but sweet. Someone else is shouting about newspapers, though the ink is still smudged, as though the presses had been as reluctant to rise as their readers. And under it all, like a steady heartbeat, the rattle of glass vials tucked inside pockets, satchels, and baskets, London's true rhythm section. Major historical fact: by the early 19th century, laudanum was cheaper than alcohol and widely available not just from apothecaries, but even grocers and street sellers. It was one of the few substances that cut across every class, from wealthy ladies sipping from etched bottles to laborers gulping it from reused beer flasks. You turn down a narrow lane, one of those places where the sun rarely reaches even at noon. Laundry flaps weakly overhead, forming a sagging canopy of damp linen. A woman at a doorway pours a splash of something dark into her tea, not hiding it, not flaunting it, simply doing what must be done to get through a morning. Obscure tidbit: some Londoners mixed laudanum directly into beer or gin, creating a murky cocktail they called poppy ale. It wasn't fashionable, but it was efficient. The sort of drink that said, "Yes, I need to get through another day, and I'd rather not remember it." You follow the sound of wheels and hooves until you arrive at a coaching inn, its yard lively with horses and travelers. Porters heave trunks, stable boys shout, and drivers crack whips in the mist. You lean against a post, watching a gentleman climb into a carriage with obvious effort. His face is pale, his hand shakes as he grips the door, and only when he settles into his seat do you notice the small vial tucked into his glove. He sips quickly, like someone stealing water in a desert. His eyes close for a moment. Then, as if revived, he straightens, adjusts his hat, and pretends to be awake. Historians still debate whether most users were truly addicted or simply tolerant, treating laudanum like one might treat endless cups of coffee today. Necessary, habitual, but not necessarily ruinous. Yet watching the gentleman slump in his seat before the carriage pulls away, you can't help but think the difference is smaller than people like to admit. The city moves on, and you move with it, your footsteps joining the weary march of those who rise only because they must. By late morning, the fog begins to lift. Not entirely, just enough for the sun to pretend it still exists. A weak light filters through, making the Thames look less like a black ribbon and more like tarnished silver. You wander toward the river, drawn by the sound of water slapping against wharves and the shouting of boatmen who always seem to argue louder than necessary. The docks smell of salt, coal, tar, and fish, a sharp cocktail that lingers in your throat. Men haul crates, roll barrels, and curse at ropes that refuse to cooperate. You stand back and watch, noticing how often a hand slips into a coat pocket, how often a cork is pulled, how often the day's grind pauses for a swallow. The river might be the lifeblood of London, but the little glass bottles are its secret pulse. Major historical fact: sailors, dock workers, and laborers often relied on laudanum to dull pain from injuries or exhaustion. Since medical care was expensive and unreliable, a penny's worth of tincture became a cure-all, even for wounds that should never have been treated with anything but rest. Obscure tidbit: Some captains rationed laudanum on long voyages, keeping it in the ship's stores alongside salt pork and rum. It wasn't just for illness. It was also used to calm seasick passengers, restless children, and occasionally mutinous sailors. In its own way, the bottle kept the ship afloat as much as the sails did. You sit on a coil of rope, listening to the slap of the river and the scrape of crates. A boy no older than 12 runs past with a bundle under his arm, nearly tripping over your foot. He looks back once, eyes sharp, and you catch the glint of glass through the cloth. Not bread, not fish, a bottle already half empty. He vanishes into the crowd, swallowed by the fog of commerce. Historians still debate whether Londoners of this age saw laudanum as medicine, comfort, or quiet rebellion against the endless drudgery of urban life. Perhaps it was all three at once, a way of saying, yes, the world is hard, but I can make it soft, if only for an hour. The tide rolls in, seagulls cry overhead, and the city feels both alive and asleep, bustling and numb. You linger, watching the water lap against the pilings, and you realize something odd. The river itself seems drowsy, sluggish, heavy with silt and secrets, just like the people who lean on its banks, clutching bottles they don't name but never let go. By the time you find yourself weaving back through London's tangled streets, the city has shifted into that restless middle-of-the-day energy. Not quite the frantic blur of morning, not yet the fading weariness of evening, just a peculiar in-between hum, like a violin string that hasn't been tuned but keeps on vibrating anyway. The markets are in full sway. Fishwives shout about the freshness of their catch, though the smell suggests otherwise. A butcher lifts a side of meat with arms so strong they look like they belong to two separate people. A baker waves off flies that seem hungrier than his customers. And threaded through it all is the quiet glimmer of glass. Small bottles tucked into baskets, rattling against onions, apples, rolls of cloth. London is not subtle about its habits. You stop near a fruit stall where a woman is selling bruised pears at half price. Her voice is low, steady, almost hypnotic. 6 for a penny, 6 for a penny, 6 for a penny. A customer nods, digs into her purse, and as casually as reaching for coins, she pulls out a bottle, takes a sip, and tucks it back into her sleeve. No shame, no secrecy, just part of the day. Major historical fact: by the early 1800s, laudanum was considered such an ordinary household item that advertisements for it ran in newspapers alongside ads for soap, hair tonic, and patent cough syrups. It was marketed as a cure for toothache, headaches, stomach cramps, and even melancholy spirits. You edge deeper into the crowd, slipping past the sharp smell of cheese, the sing-song of vendors, and the sharp clang of a bell that signals a new delivery. Everywhere you see it again. The tilt of a wrist, the faint amber glint of liquid, the sigh that follows a swallow. A man selling ink pauses mid-sentence, dozes himself, and resumes his pitch as if nothing had happened. A seamstress haggling for thread keeps her bottle in plain sight on the counter. Obscure tidbit: some shops actually offered laudanum change. If you didn't have the right coins, the seller would pour a measured spoonful of tincture to make up the difference, like liquid currency. A penny short? No problem. A drop or two and the deal was done. Historians still debate whether this wide openness reflected true ignorance of laudanum's risks, or whether it was more a kind of cultural shrug, an agreement that the world was already hard enough, and nobody needed more rules about how to cope with it. You lean against a post, watching the swirl of trade, and you think, London itself is like a bottle, full of bite, full of sting, full of things that could make you dizzy if you take too much at once. The cork is loose, the glass fragile, and the city, like its people, pretends it isn't. By mid-afternoon, you've wandered away from the clamorous markets into a quieter quarter of the city, where the sound of hammers on iron fades and the drone of distant bells carries on the breeze. Here, narrow lanes lead toward private houses with heavy doors and thick curtains, the kind that try very hard not to admit how much goes on behind them. This is not the London of stalls and baskets, but the London of parlors and drawing rooms. A maid sweeps dust from a step, her apron neat, her hair less so. From behind her, you glimpse a lady reclined on a sofa, a shawl draped artfully over her shoulders. On a nearby table sits a glass decanter, not of brandy or port, but of laudanum. The liquid glows faintly in the filtered light, like something alive. Major historical fact. Wealthier households often kept laudanum not in tiny corked vials, but in elegant glass decanters, displayed as if they were fine liqueurs. Guests might be offered a dose as casually as a sip of sherry. You imagine the scene inside. Polite conversation, embroidered cushions, the ticking of a long case clock, and the faint clink of spoons against porcelain as tincture is stirred into tea. Someone coughs, someone sighs, someone speaks about the latest pamphlet or the newest scandal, and all the while the air is heavy, warm, and just slightly blurred at the edges. Obscure tidbit. Some hosts even flavored laudanum with spices or fruit peel to make it taste more sociable. Recipes survive for what was essentially Victorian cocktail culture, except instead of brandy you were dosing yourself with opium. You drift along the lane and notice the subtle signs. Curtained windows at midday, drawn not for privacy but because light feels too sharp. Carriages pulling up, not with laughter, but with silence, their passengers stepping down a little too carefully. A faint smell, bittersweet, that clings to the air like perfume left too long on fabric. Historians still debate whether upper-class laudanum use was a marker of status, a way of showing you could afford endless comfort, or whether it was simply the same weary habit dressed up in silver spoons. The answer, you suspect, lies somewhere between. As the bells toll the hour, you turn back toward the busier streets. The air feels thicker here, heavier, as if the city has had its own sip and now dreams in the middle of the day. And you, caught in the midst of it, feel as though you've been gently drugged by nothing more than walking. Evening creeps into London slowly, like someone unsure whether they've been invited to the party. The sky takes on a soft bruised tint, all lavender and smoke, and lanterns wink awake one by one. The streets hum in a lower register now. Less bustle, more murmuring, the sigh of wheels, the shuffle of boots. You pass along the Strand, where coffeehouses glow with steady light. Their windows reveal huddles of men bent over newspapers, debating loudly about Parliament, wars, and trade. Coffee is supposed to sharpen the mind, but here, there's something else in the mix. Behind teacups and saucers, a few familiar amber bottles rest discreetly in coat pockets, their corks slightly loosened. Major historical fact. Coffeehouses of Georgian London were notorious for doubling as places of intoxication, not just by coffee, but by opium-laced tinctures. Some proprietors quietly encouraged the practice, offering laudanum-spiked coffee to regulars who preferred their debates softened around the edges. You linger at the doorway, letting the smells wash over you. Roasting beans, damp wool, candle wax, and that unmistakable bittersweetness of tincture. One man gestures wildly about trade with India, but his words drift into sluggish repetition. Another tries to argue about taxes but loses his thought halfway through and instead stares at the ceiling as though the answer might be up there. Nobody minds. In fact, it makes the conversation friendlier. Less like a duel, more like a half-finished lullaby. Obscure tidbit. Some coffeehouses even kept what was called an opium chair, a particularly deep, soft armchair reserved for customers who had dosed themselves too generously and needed a safe place to drift into half-sleep while others argued around them. Historians still debate whether these practices truly blurred the lines between public debate and private intoxication, or whether we're reading too much into scattered anecdotes. But standing there, you can almost believe it. The city outside the coffeehouse feels different now, more dreamlike, slower. Gaslight halos soften the cobblestones, and shadows stretch long between the horses and carts. You walk on, your steps syncing with the faint rhythm of hooves, feeling as though London itself has leaned back in its chair, poured itself a measure, and decided to let the evening do the talking. By the time you find yourself near the river, night has fully settled in. The Thames slides by, dark and deliberate, reflecting lantern light in restless shivers. On its banks, figures linger, dockworkers, sailors, and a scattering of those who prefer the night's anonymity to the day's exposure. You hear laughter first, uneven, lilting, like glass bottles clinking. Following the sound, you see a small gathering, men and women hunched close around a crate, each holding something in their hands. Not mugs of ale, not flasks of gin, but the telltale gleam of tiny bottles. Laudanum passed hand to hand, like communion in a church no one admits exists. Major historical fact. By the late Georgian period, laudanum was not only in households and apothecaries but also on the docks, easily accessible to sailors and laborers. It became an equalizer, used by the poor for pain, by the wealthy for nerves, and by children for sleep. You pause in the shadows and watch. One man lifts his bottle high as though making a toast. Another leans heavily against a crate, murmuring nonsense that makes his companions chuckle. A woman dips a rag into her bottle and holds it against her temple like a perfumed compress. The river, unbothered, rolls on. Obscure tidbit. Some dockside vendors even sold laudanum-soaked gingerbread. For a penny, you could buy a cake that would warm your stomach, sweeten your tongue, and lull your body all at once. The perfect nightcap if one ignored the consequences. Historians still debate whether gatherings like these should be understood as addiction circles or simply as desperate forms of community. Pockets of people using whatever they could find to soften the sharp edges of poverty. The damp air settles heavy on your shoulders. A barge creaks by, its ropes straining like weary muscles. A gull screams overhead, offended for reasons only gulls understand. And you realize something simple. This city is not just addicted to laudanum. It is stitched together by it. From parlors to markets, from coffeehouses to docks, the same amber thread runs through. As you turn back from the river, lanterns flickering along the wharf, you think. London is not merely a place of trade and empire. It is also a place quietly swaying on its own invisible tide. Midnight London is a peculiar creature. It doesn't sleep, it never really has, but it changes shape, as though pulling a thick blanket of fog over itself and daring you to see through it. You walk along Cheapside, the shops shuttered, their painted signs swinging lazily in the damp wind. A lamplighter passes you, pole in hand, dimming flames one by one as if declaring the day finished by decree. The city doesn't listen. Behind closed doors, voices still murmur, and somewhere a fiddle scrapes against strings, thin but insistent. And from certain windows you can see that amber flicker, not of candlelight, but of glass bottles catching a glow as they tilt. Major historical fact. By the early 19th century, Londoners consumed more laudanum per capita than any other European city. Doctors prescribed it for everything from toothaches to tuberculosis, while grocers and market vendors kept bottles behind counters like flour or sugar. A cat slinks past you, pausing only to give you the sort of look that suggests it has better places to be. You turn into a narrower street, where the air smells of stale bread and wood smoke. Behind a thin door left slightly ajar, you glimpse a scene. A family gathered not around supper, but around a single bottle. The father carefully doles out drops onto bread. The mother passes it to a coughing child, and everyone waits, quiet, as though trusting the bottle more than prayer. Obscure tidbit. Some London families actually kept their laudanum bottles in decorated cabinets, treating them almost like shrines, safeguarded objects that stood alongside religious icons or family portraits. Historians still debate whether such rituals represented reverence, resignation, or simply habit. But here, now, as you pass that house and hear the silence that follows, it feels more like devotion, a faith placed in amber glass. The night presses on. You feel the cobblestones grow slick under your boots, the fog cling to your sleeves, and the city hum in that low, restless voice. It isn't chaos. It's something gentler, stranger, as if London itself is slowly swaying, eyes half-lidded, unwilling to be fully awake but unwilling to surrender to sleep. You drift back toward Covent Garden, where the market that bustles in daylight now sleeps under canvas tarps and half-empty crates. The air is cooler here, touched by the faint sweetness of fruit that has grown tired of waiting to be sold. Somewhere in the shadows, you hear laughter again. Lighter this time, less like revelry and more like the quiet amusement of people trying to keep themselves awake. Around a corner, you find them. A group of apprentices sprawled on sacks, their coats tucked under their heads, a single lantern dangling overhead. They are passing around a bottle, each taking the smallest sip, grimacing at the bitterness, then sinking back into giggles. They whisper stories to each other, half true, half dreamed. About masters too strict, about noblewomen glimpsed from afar, about the impossible futures that await them. Major historical fact: laudanum was often used by apprentices and younger laborers as a cheap alternative to alcohol. Cost less than gin, and a few drops could carry you much further into dream. You watch as one boy tips the bottle and accidentally spills a drop onto his sleeve. He stares at it, frowns, then shrugs, muttering something about feeding the cloth. His friends laugh as though it's the funniest thing ever said in London. Obscure tidbit: in some London workshops, masters accused apprentices of borrowing the medicine, sneaking doses from shop supplies meant for customers. A few even locked their apothecary shelves with chains, as though guarding treasure. Historians still debate how widespread this was, but the apprentices here don't seem especially worried. They pass the bottle again, their voices lowering, their eyes growing heavier. One of them begins humming, off-key, but persistent, a melody that seems more lullaby than song. You sit with them in silence for a moment, letting the warmth of the lantern soak into your face. Around you, the market creaks in the night breeze, canvas shifting like sails. Somewhere, far off, a bell tolls 1 o'clock, its sound stretching thin through the fog. And as you rise and walk away, the apprentice is already sliding toward dreams behind you. You think of how strange it is that London never really sleeps. Yet so much of it drifts like this, somewhere between waking and forgetting. The night loosens its grip as you turn toward the statelier parts of town. The cobbles are smoother here, the houses broader and cleaner, as though the streets themselves have higher social standing. Iron railings line the steps, and windows glow with a softer, steadier light, the kind that hints not at taverns or workshops, but at parlors filled with upholstered chairs and porcelain teacups. You pause outside one such townhouse. The curtains are not quite drawn, and inside you glimpse a tableau that feels almost staged for your eyes. A family gathered in a parlor, the father lounging in a high-backed chair, the mother leaning over embroidery, and a daughter reading aloud from a novel with the same reverent voice she might use for scripture. At her elbow on the side table rests a bottle. Major historical fact: in wealthier households, laudanum was often kept in decorative decanters, indistinguishable from sherry or cordial at first glance. Guests might be offered it in small, lidded glasses, under the polite pretense of settling the nerves. The daughter stumbles on a line in her book, blushes, and quickly sips from a teacup before continuing. Her father chuckles indulgently. No one mentions the bottle. They don't need to. His presence is as ordinary here as a Bible or a clock. Obscure tidbit. Some genteel families even wrote prescriptions for laudanum into their household ledgers, itemized alongside butter, candles, and coal. A necessity, scribbled in neat ink, as if to justify its constancy. Historians still debate whether the upper classes acknowledged their reliance or simply chose to veil it in ritual. Did they believe it truly medicinal, or was it simply too respectable to question? You linger at the window, watching the daughter pause, yawn, and then resume her reading with renewed steadiness, as though the bitter tincture itself had propped up her sentences. Beyond her voice, the house is silent. The tick of a mantel clock carries more weight than conversation, as if all present have agreed to let words drift away, replaced by the steady warmth of the bottle's influence. You step back onto the street. Here, London feels quieter. Not because it sleeps, but because it holds its breath, waiting for dawn with the same stillness that fills drawing rooms when novels fade into silence. You drift further west, toward houses so large they look like miniature fortresses. The lamps here burn brighter, fueled by steady purses, and the fog seems thinner, as if wealth has found a way to push back the damp. But inside these houses, too, laudanum has seeped, though it wears a different face. Through a partly open gate, you glimpse a garden. Roses, heavy-headed even in night, bow toward gravel paths. A conservatory window glows, and through it you see a lady reclining on a chaise longue, pale silk spilling around her like water. A maid hovers with a small bottle, carefully counting drops into a glass. The lady stirs only slightly, lifting her hand as though conducting invisible music. Major historical fact: laudanum was commonly prescribed to wealthy women diagnosed with hysteria or nervous complaints. Doctors, eager to maintain genteel appearances, often encouraged its use, sometimes daily. The maid steps back, waiting silently as the lady drinks, then resumes her place by the door like a shadow. The conservatory fills with the faint smell of blossoms and alcohol. You can almost hear the hush of leaves outside, mirroring the hush inside. A cultivated silence, not unlike the drug's own embrace. Obscure tidbit: some fashionable London households even infused laudanum with spices, blending it into cordial recipes and serving it at small gatherings. Guests politely praised the aromatic relief, while ignoring the bitterness underneath. Historians still debate whether these recipes were acts of concealment, or merely attempts to make the daily dose more pleasant. Perhaps both. You step away from the gate, letting the image dissolve into mist. The street beyond stretches empty, though the windows remain alive with flickers of lamplight and shadowy figures moving slowly, dreamily, inside. Here, in these polished homes, laudanum does not feel like survival, it feels like fashion. But as with all fashions, its sheen conceals the weight beneath. And as you keep walking, you cannot help but think of the washerwoman you saw earlier in the alleys. Red hands plunged in icy water, and wonder if the distance between her and this lady in silk is narrower than either of them might like to believe. The fog thickens again as you drift toward the Strand, where London's heartbeat feels different, faster, louder, punctuated by theaters and bookshops. This is not a district of silence but of voices, eager to perform, to publish, to be noticed. And yet, even here, laudanum has its part to play. You pass a small bookstall still open under lantern glow. The bookseller, yawning and pulling his coat tighter, gestures half-heartedly at his wares. Cheap pamphlets, serialized stories, and plays stack untidily, their paper edges curled from damp. One cover catches your eye, a melodrama whose villain is suspiciously pale and languid, whose motives seem to dissolve into a haze of dreams. You smile faintly, it feels familiar, doesn't it? Major historical fact: several well-known Romantic and Victorian writers, Coleridge, De Quincey, Even Dickens in quieter moments were acquainted with laudanum. Some wrote vividly about its effects. Others merely let it seep between the lines. The bookseller scratches his head, mutters something about genius never being sober, and waves you along. His lantern sputters, making the pamphlets seem to ripple, as if alive. You keep walking and soon find yourself before a theater. Posters pasted on the walls shout in bold lettering about comedies and tragedies, though the ink already runs from fog. A small group lingers by the door, giggling, their cheeks flushed not only from wine but from the glass vials they pass discreetly between them. For nerves, one whispers, though the grin on her face suggests it is for something else entirely. Obscure tidbit. Some actors were rumored to take laudanum before performances to steady the voice, though what it actually did was blur their memory and add a strange, dreamlike cadence to their lines. Historians still debate whether the laudanum-tinged performances audiences witnessed were truly art, or simply intoxication mistaken for genius. The crowd disperses, and you glance up at the poster once more. It shows a heroic figure, sword raised, eyes blazing. You wonder how many such posters were painted while the artist's hand trembled under laudanum's spell. And as you step back into the fog, you realize London's culture is not merely gilded by the drug. It is saturated with it. The night grows quieter as you slip away from the bright hum of the Strand and into the quieter lanes near Bloomsbury. Here, houses are smaller, yet windows glow with a different kind of light. The steady flame of oil lamps illuminating desks littered with papers, books, and half-finished letters. This is the neighborhood of thinkers, scholars, poets, many of whom wrestled with inspiration, exhaustion, and more than a few bottles of laudanum. You pause at one such window. Inside, a man leans over a desk, scratching furiously across the page. His hair is wild, his candle nearly burned to the base. Beside him, a familiar bottle half empty, its amber glass catching the light. He pauses to sip, closes his eyes, and then resumes, faster, as though the words pour not from his mind but from the drug itself. Major historical fact: Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater, 1821, gave laudanum an almost literary glamour, describing both its euphoric dreams and its terrible nightmares. His book influenced generations, making the drug both infamous and strangely fashionable among intellectual circles. The writer inside the room stares at the page, then suddenly laughs, scribbles out a line, and rewrites it, muttering. You can't hear the words, but the cadence is erratic, wild bursts followed by long, frozen pauses. Obscure tidbit. Some literary societies joked that if a writer's prose grew too dreamlike or ornate, readers could assume laudanum had a hand in it. It was a half-joke, half-truth, like so many Victorian witticisms. Historians still debate whether laudanum fueled creativity or merely gave writers the illusion of inspiration while draining their strength beneath the surface. The candle sputters. The writer dips his pen again. His eyes glaze, then sharpen, then glaze once more. You step away from the window, letting the mist swallow the scene. The street around you feels hushed, heavy with unspoken words, like a library after hours, every volume secretly intoxicated. And as you walk on, you begin to sense that laudanum is not merely medicine, not merely a crutch. It has become part of the very fabric of thought and imagination. London dreams on laudanum whether it admits it or not. The fog seems to thin as you leave Bloomsbury's windows behind, but the air grows heavier with another kind of weight. You find yourself wandering toward the wards of a hospital, where the sharp smell of carbolic and damp straw clings to the walls. The lamps are dimmer here, flickering more reluctantly, and the silence is broken not by pens scratching across paper but by coughing, groaning, and the occasional muttered prayer. Hospitals in Georgian and Victorian London were not havens of comfort. They were often overcrowded, understaffed, and layered with more misery than medicine. You pause outside one doorway, where the cries of a child pierce the night, only to fade into an eerie stillness after a nurse administers something from a spoon. Laudanum again, of course. It soothed pain, calmed coughs, and lulled bodies to sleep, even if sleep was sometimes a prelude to never waking. Major historical fact. Laudanum was one of the most common treatments prescribed in hospitals across 18th and 19th century Britain, given not only for pain relief but also for diarrhea, fevers, insomnia, and general agitation. It was considered almost universal in its application. The nurse sets the bottle back on the shelf, its glass catching the lamplight. Rows upon rows of similar bottles line the wall, as if the entire ward is kept afloat by this dark amber tide. You hear footsteps, doctors pacing briskly, their boots clicking against stone, their voices quick but tired. Another dose, one says curtly, and the sound blends into the rhythm of the hospital itself. Obscure tidbit. In some hospitals, laudanum was even mixed into broth or gruel for patients who refused to swallow medicine. Imagine a bowl of thin, lukewarm porridge that also carried the weight of opium. That is one dinner you probably wouldn't remember finishing. Historians still debate whether this reliance on laudanum was genuine compassion or simply convenience, an easier way to quiet wards overflowing with suffering. You step softly back into the corridor. The walls seem to hum faintly with the sound of countless breaths rising and falling, some drawn out and shallow, some heavy and restless. And everywhere, the drug drifts like a shadow, blurring the line between treatment and escape. When you finally leave the ward, the outside air feels cold, bracing, but tinged with melancholy. The city itself seems weary, wrapped in the same drugged hush as those inside. From the solemn wards you drift toward another institution, less orderly, more unforgiving. The prison. The path narrows here, walls growing higher, the streets harsher. Lanterns hang from crooked iron posts, throwing uneven light across cobblestones slick with fog. Somewhere, a key rattles in a lock, followed by the heavy scrape of a door shutting with finality. Prison life in Georgian London was a world of its own. Bleak, crowded, and perpetually damp. Yet even here, laudanum crept in through cracks and crevices. A warder mutters to another about smuggling. A shadowed figure presses coins into a hand. Bottles pass from palm to palm, sometimes disguised as medicine, other times as contraband. Major historical fact. Laudanum was sometimes used in prisons as both a tranquilizer and a quiet bribe. Warders tolerated its presence because it kept inmates subdued, less likely to riot, less likely to cause trouble. You glance into a cell where a prisoner sits hunched against the wall, his eyes half closed. His hands rest limply on his knees, his breathing slow but even. At first you might think he's asleep, but no. The bottle beside him reveals the truth. Even here, in the cold shadow of punishment, laudanum offers its peculiar kind of relief. Obscure tidbit. There were whispers that some jailers kept small supplies of laudanum not only for the prisoners, but for themselves, to bear the noise, as one account put it. Guarding a block of restless souls was easier when you, too, had blurred the edges of your thoughts. Historians still debate whether prison authorities turned a blind eye out of pragmatism or out of corruption. Perhaps both. You walk on, past iron bars that glisten with condensation, past straw that rustles faintly as men shift in uneasy sleep. The corridors feel endless, as if London has hollowed itself out just to house its weary and its damned. When you emerge back into the foggy night, the contrast is startling. Freedom feels lighter, but tinged with the knowledge that laudanum has seeped into every tier of life. Poets, patients, prisoners alike. No one is untouched. And as you wander once more into the streets, you realize the city itself is the addict, and you are merely passing through its long, drowsy dream. The city's fog follows you like a stubborn cloak, but after enough wandering, you find yourself on roads that lead outward, roads where cobblestones give way to dirt, where lamp posts thin into hedgerows, and where the air tastes faintly of earth rather than soot. The countryside of Georgian and Victorian England is no pastoral idyll, though poets often painted it that way. Life here is heavy with work, endless mud, and a quiet dependence on the same potions that lulled London. You walk past cottages sagging under thatch, their windows flickering with pale candlelight. Inside, families huddle around tables, bowls of stew steaming faintly, and on the shelf in the corner, yes, there it is again. The small brown bottle, half hidden behind jars of pickled onions or dried herbs. Laudanum has followed you even here. Major historical fact: in rural England, apothecaries and traveling salesmen made laudanum readily available to farming families. It was cheaper than a doctor, easier than rest, and more reliable than folk remedies. A few drops calmed a colicky child, quieted an aching back, and dulled the sting of hunger when food was scarce. You hear a baby crying from one cottage, its sharp little wail carrying across the hedges. A mother, her hands cracked from scrubbing linen in icy water, dips a spoon into the bottle and coaxes silence. The relief is palpable. The crying stops, replaced by the faintest sigh of sleep. Yet beneath it, you sense unease, the silent question that hangs unasked. How many dozes before quiet becomes too permanent? Obscure tidbit. In some villages, laudanum was nicknamed the poor man's bread, not because it fed the body, but because it blunted hunger itself. A few drops in weak tea could make an empty stomach forget its hollowness long enough to get through another day of work. Historians still debate whether these rural households were victims of circumstance or of habit. Did they rely on laudanum because they had no other choice, or because they grew accustomed to its easy silence? You pass a barn where cows shuffle sleepily in the straw, and you can't help but think the beasts themselves seem drugged by the heavy, humid air. The fields stretch out in every direction, silvered by moonlight, damp with mist. And there, in the cottages dotting the land, amber bottles gleam softly in the dark like quiet companions. The countryside, it turns out, dreams the same dreams as the city. Further along the road, you stumble into a small rural market. By day it bustles with chatter, but at night it lies mostly silent, the stalls half covered with canvas, the scent of onions and turnips lingering in the cool air. And yet there is movement still. A cart creaks into the square, its wheels crunching gravel, its driver humming under his breath. Behind him, crates of wares, glass bottles clinking faintly with each bump. This is not a farmer's produce wagon. This is the rural chemist's mobile shop, the lifeline of villages that rarely see a doctor. His offerings are simple: tonics, powders, and above all, laudanum, sold in small bottles that could soothe anything from toothaches to heartbreak. Major historical fact: traveling apothecaries and merchants spread laudanum deep into the countryside by the early 19th century, ensuring even the most remote hamlets had access to it. It was sold without prescription, often alongside spices, teas, and home remedies. You overhear a transaction. A farmer's wife trades a few coins for a bottle, her fingers trembling slightly as she tucks it into her apron. She whispers something about her husband's cough, but the way her eyes linger suggests the bottle has more than one intended user. Obscure tidbit: some traveling sellers mixed laudanum into miracle waters and marketed them as divine cures, claiming they came from healing springs. Villagers believed these concoctions were blessed, never guessing the blessing was opium in disguise. Historians still debate whether these sellers truly believed their own claims or were simply shrewd businessmen capitalizing on suffering. Perhaps both. You wander the market stalls, A basket of apples sits forgotten, dew gathering on their skins. A cage of chickens rustles, unsettled by the night. And in the corner, a young boy perches on a barrel, swinging his legs as he sips from a cup. His mother frowns, hissing at him to drink slower. You know by now what's in that cup. The market is quiet, yet the silence feels heavier than it should, as if the entire village is nodding gently under the same invisible hand. Even the stray dog curled beneath a cart snores more deeply than you'd expect. You leave the square, the road stretching on, fields fading into woods. Behind you, the chemist's cart rattles away, carrying with it the bottles that shape this countryside's uneasy rest. And you realize, whether in the soot-thick heart of London or the damp fields of its villages, laudanum is everywhere. A quiet companion, a silent danger, a dream in amber glass. The road narrows as you move further, winding between hedgerows and fading into a path that seems less traveled, less certain of where it wishes to go. It feels like the story itself is tapering, the threads of London's soot and the countryside's mist weaving together into something softer, slower, a haze that no longer asks you to follow closely, but simply to drift with it. You hear the wind, gentle now, no longer rattling windows or shaking chimney pots. It moves like a hush through the fields, carrying scents of damp hay, wild garlic, and wood smoke. Somewhere far off, a bell tolls, a church announcing the hour, not because anyone needs to know, but because bells like to remind you they exist. Remember the street you walked past in London, where a shop window glowed with amber bottles. Imagine it again now, but faded, as though someone laid tracing paper over the memory. The glow is softer, the bottles blur. The whole city begins to feel like a dream you half remember, the kind you might mention at breakfast and then forget by supper. Major historical fact: by the late 19th century, concern about laudanum's dangers finally began to surface. Doctors debated its risks, reformers called for regulations, and writers began slipping warnings between their poetic lines. The age of easy opium was waning, though slowly, reluctantly, like a candle refusing to die out. Obscure tidbit: some families, wary of their reliance, hid bottles under floorboards or in teapots, only to discover later that someone, perhaps a child, perhaps the grandmother, always knew where to find them. Addiction leaves trails even when hidden. Historians still debate whether the slow shift away from laudanum was driven by medical ethics or by public scandals. Perhaps, as always, it was both. The path dips into a small clearing, where moonlight spreads like spilled milk over the grass. You pause, listening. The world feels heavy with sleep. The cottages you passed, the markets, the chimneys, the fields, they all seem to settle into stillness, as if every character you met is resting now, bottles tucked away, dreams thick and amber-colored. And so you rest with them. Let the story loosen now, like a cloak slipping from your shoulders. The journey through laudanum's world does not end sharply. It exhales slowly, like the long sigh of someone finally easing into bed after a day too heavy with cobblestones, too full of errands, too crowded with bottles glowing faintly on every shelf. Picture the streets you walked earlier. London's alleys no longer clatter with carts or cries. Instead, they glow faintly, mist curling at the edges, lanterns reduced to warm smudges of light. The countryside, too, the fields silvered by dew, cottages tucked like sleeping animals into the hedgerows. Even the restless dogs and babies have fallen quiet, lulled by something greater than medicine. Lulled, perhaps, by history itself easing into silence. The wind drifts across your skin, cool and light, carrying nothing urgent, just the soft reminder that the world, even with its poisons and mistakes, has always found its way to rest. Your footsteps no longer matter. You could pause here or wander further, but either way the road folds gently beneath you, steady, certain, calm. The voices of the past grow faint. The apothecaries with their miracle bottles, the mothers dipping spoons into amber glass, the philosophers scribbling by candlelight with cups at their elbows. All of them drift away now. Their outlines blur, their whispers thin, until they are little more than shadows swaying in the fog. Breathe slowly. The night is kind. The story has no sharp ending, only this. A gentle fade, a slow dissolve, like ink seeping into paper, or a candle's flame bowing to its wick. You are safe. The world has quieted. You can rest.